My name is Marjee Levine, and I am an iron caster. Iron casting is a form of sculpture that you make a positive and make a mold and then melt the metal and pour it into the mold and then finish your metalwork. There are a lot of things that drew me to iron casting and metal casting in general, not the least of which is latent pyromania. But a lot of it was also just there's a physical, sort of element of physicality and hard work. There's a sense of community, right? It takes a whole group of people just to cast one person's work. So the way that we source our material is kind of unique. With iron, one of the things I love is that we're using industrial scrap. So we're getting radiators and bathtubs and sinks and engine blocks and all these industrial things that end up in heaps at the scrapyard. We are smashing them up into like Dorito sized pieces and then they get melted in the furnace. We are taking a solid material in the form of industrial scrap. We are transforming it through fire and it is reborn as artwork.
What about iron casting is unsustainable? What aspects to it?
All of it. We're pretty dirty. We use a lot of fossil fuels. We create a lot of waste. It's also not necessarily super sustainable as far as physical health either, right? There's a lot of hard, heavy work, a lot of fumes, a lot of actual, ingestion hazards. And we, of course, mitigate all of those things using best practices, right? We're in the right respirator if we're using dust, etc. But there's not a lot of it that could be labeled sustainable. One of the things that I truly believe is that craft is a sustainable mindset. If you look at types of contemporary artwork that may be made out of materials that are a little bit more fleeting, those might not last very long out in the world, or may be intended to be ephemeral, and then where do they go, right? Are they going to a landfill? Bronze lasts forever, right? Literally. So the idea that I can teach proper craft all the way through as far as best practices, like if you learn how to make a good mold properly once, as opposed to half-assing a mold and having to redo it 3 times, right? That idea of good craft is a really sustainable mindset. When it actually comes to employing sustainable practices in the foundry, the best thing that I can do is try to make better choices. One type of the molds that we're making have to be fired in a kiln to de-wax and fire the mold before we can pour metal into it. So everybody here knows that I'm not gonna heat up that kiln just for a couple molds, right? We're gonna make sure that we have a requisite number of molds because it takes the same amount of gas to heat up that kiln to temperature, whether there's 2 molds in there or 50. Same with the furnaces, right? It takes 2 hours to heat up the bronze furnace, so I'm not heating up the whole furnace to pour 2 molds. Same with material use, right? I try really hard to make sure that everybody's collaborating so that if we're mixing rubber or resin sand or whatever, we're using it the most efficiently we can. Not using excess, right? Not creating as much waste. And then teaching proper disposal of all of those materials too, right? So again, I have choices in the types of resin that we're using for our molds, and I'm choosing, a less toxic one. It's still not great, right? But making sure that people understand that we're acknowledging our impact. I hope we don't run out of resources. Bronze and aluminum furnaces are natural gas fired. We're not going to run out of natural gas anytime soon, although we're going to destroy a whole bunch of land to find more. But the iron furnaces are actually coke fired. It's a refined form of coal, and it's getting harder and harder to find suppliers that even have coke. I don't know if that means a shift to try to find a different fuel, right, which other people have tried. And it's been coke since the 1600s for a reason. A lot of what we do at the art scale metal casting is heavily influenced by industry. If the industrial suppliers could figure out some less toxic alternatives, then eventually that would trickle down to us. Although the inverse of that is that we're actually the innovators, right? The creative thinkers are the ones that actually figure stuff out. So we'll see what happens. I make no bones about the fact that we're pretty dirty. but no more or less worthy of being part of the conversation about sustainability. So I think it's pretty crucial to have like all of those voices involved.